Welcome back
Comparison
to the
bias.
Simplify Senior Transitions podcast. I'm Dale Corpus, the Senior Transition Specialist and real estate expert, and I help families navigate the often overwhelming process of selling a senior's home while transitioning them into the right living environment. One of the biggest mistakes families make is waiting too long to plan ahead. Without the proper legal documents in place, things can get complicated fast, especially when it comes to managing a loved one's home and assets. That's why I'm so excited to have Jeanette Marsala here today. Jeanette is an experienced estate planning attorney who helps families protect their assets and avoid the legal pitfalls that come with aging and senior transitions. But beyond her legal expertise, she's also the founder of Senior Care Business Support South Bay, a group dedicated to supporting and growing businesses in the senior care industry through collaboration, networking, and shared resources. Today, we're diving into one, why every senior and their family needs a living trust. Two, the biggest misconceptions about estate planning. Three, how estate planning ties into senior transitions and real estate. Four, what families should know about probate and tax benefits of trusts. And five, how the Senior Care Business Support South Bay Group is creating a network for senior care professionals. If you want to protect your family from legal headaches and financial stress, or if you're a senior care professional looking for powerful industry connections, this episode is for you. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast, where we help families navigate senior living, real estate, and everything in between. Hosted by Senior Transition Specialist Dale Corpus, this show brings you expert insights, real solutions, and stress-free strategies to make senior transitions simple. Ready to dive in? Let's go.
And we are back, everybody. Jeanette, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. It's nice to be here.
So I'm glad that we're able to connect this Saturday morning. Can you share a little bit about your background and why you chose to specialize in estate planning?
Yeah, so I actually started off in high school wanting to be an engineer. I had no idea I wanted to be an attorney, and then when I decided engineering was not the course for me, I ultimately decided, okay, I can be a business law attorney, right? I grew up in Silicon Valley during the dot-com era, so that was the thing, was being an engineer. And if not that, then what? I'm like, all right, I can work as in-house counsel at some of these tech companies, right? Like, I'm an introvert. I don't really like a lot of public speaking. That seemed like a great thing. I go to law school and I get this internship doing litigation. And I start geeking out on all the research and the writing. I'm like, all right, maybe litigation's not so bad. So then when I started off my career, I was in litigation. I was actually doing a lot of bankruptcy litigation. So I represented a lot of homeowners as they were going through bankruptcy. Then I switched to the other side, represented a lot of mortgage companies when the borrowers were filed for bankruptcy. Did a lot of that for a number of years. And after a while, you're not happy with what you're doing. And so it comes to the decision of, all right, what am I not happy with? Is it this area of law? Is it this law firm? Is it law altogether? Do I just need to change careers? And I came out to, well, what do I really want to do with my life? I want to help families. I want to help them before a problem occurs. I want to prevent the problem from happening. And that really led me over to estate planning, because you can be very proactive in protecting a family before they have to go through probate, before they have to deal with all these messes. And so I really like the idea of educating the public and people about what to do and preventing problems from happening. So that lends itself very beautifully with estate planning. Also, with my background in bankruptcy and asset protection, it all wraps up very nicely. And it was like the best career move ever. I truly love what I do.
Yeah, you sound very passionate about it, and I love working with passionate people that do what they do. I have a question. Many people think a will is enough. What's the difference between a will and a living trust?
It is. That is a very common question and a lot of confusion around it. So I like to describe a will as a letter to the probate judge. Dear judge, when I am gone, I want to leave my house to my kids or to charity or whoever you want to leave it to. But it's dear judge. So will still goes through the probate process, right? The judge will follow what you want in your will, which may be different than what state law says should happen. So great. If you don't want to leave everything to your kids, which is what the law may provide, then your will may say, okay, I want to leave it to charity. And the judge will follow your will, which says everything should go to charity. But we're still dealing with the court process after you're gone. Now, the other side of things is a trust. A trust is a private way of distributing assets from one person to the next. So I like to think of a trust as the closest kind of analogy that I use is like a business, right? You are creating this trust. The trust will own your assets, just like you can create a business. The business owns your assets. Now, while you're alive, you are the one who created the business or the trust. You are also the shareholder. You're the one who can use the money for your benefit. You're also the manager or the CEO. You're the trustee. You're in charge. So when you create a trust, the trust owns all of your assets, but you're still in charge because you're still the trustee of the trust. And while you're alive, you're essentially the beneficiary. So when you create a trust, you don't need a judge to order the transfer of one asset to the others because the trust agreement does all of that in lieu of the court proceeding. So a trust will avoid a probate proceeding. A will does not. And that's really going to be the big difference is what assets has to go through the probate process and what assets can avoid it. And how are we titling assets and the pros and cons of each approach? It's not necessarily a simple thing, especially if you own real estate, you have retirement accounts, life insurance, all of those things will be treated differently. And you have to have different strategies for each type of asset.
Got it. What happens if someone passes away without a living trust, and what legal challenges do families face?
So one, it really kind of depends. And this is where it comes down to, you always have to look at what are the assets that they own when they pass away, right? Because if you think about it, a homeless person on the street doesn't need to worry about going through the court process after they're gone. So when I give a presentation on how to avoid probate, number one strategy, be broke. Don't even worry about probate if you don't own anything. Typically, that's not the strategy that we want. We want to have some wealth. We want to be comfortable. We generally don't want to be broke. So it's typically not a strategy I would recommend. But when it comes to avoiding probate, you got to look at what assets you have. So do you have a house? How is the house titled? Is it jointly owned with someone? Then you're looking at, okay, maybe we can avoid probate on the first death, but what about the second death, right? What taxes might happen when you're transferring from the first person to the second person, right? Those are all things that we're going to take a look at. With regards to your bank account, is it your individual name or is it in the trust? Same with life insurance. Do you have beneficiaries named? I had a client last year where they had a retirement account, named beneficiaries, thought it would avoid probate. They had 3 kids though. So 100 divided by 3 is what? It doesn't divide equally. It's
Yeah, it
33. Wait, 333%, right? But generally you can't do that fraction, right? So each kid they put down essentially received 33%. But when you add 33 plus 33 plus 33, you get 99. So the banks essentially said that 1% needs to go through probate. And they had a trust. But because of that 1% on the beneficiary designation, right? So you always have to take a look at each asset and analyze it individually and see what is going to happen to that asset. Now in California, we also have a small state procedure where if you own less than, it's roughly 180,000. There's some, I just use round numbers. So 180,000 roughly. It's a little bit higher than that, but roughly $180,000 now in California that will allow you to avoid probate. So if you just have a checking account with $2,000 and that's literally all you have, I'm 18 years old. I have more student loan debt than assets, right? And something happens to me. Do I need to worry about probate? probably not. We can use that small state affidavit to get access to the $2 in your checking account. So the struggles that family encounter after someone's gone when they have not done any planning will vary, right? Depending upon the assets you have, how are things titled, it can get very messy.
Right.
What's the family dynamics like? There's a lot that can happen. And so where I come in as the attorney is I help navigate through that process, taking a look at every single asset. How are things titled? What's going to happen now if we don't do a plan? Is that okay with you? Sometimes it might be. I have some clients that come to me where they co-own title with someone, not necessarily a spouse, maybe with a child or a sibling, right? And they're like, you know what? I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm okay with it avoiding probate on my first death, and then whoever survives, well, it'll be on them to create a trust or a plan for whatever. And they're okay with the risk of it going through probate on the second death. That's an acceptable risk for them. And that's totally fine. My big thing is I want you to be aware of the risk and educated about it so you're making informed decisions. Most of my families, who come to me for planning, they're like, I don't even care for that risk. I'm very risk adverse. I want to make sure my family is not going to be dealing with the stress of everything. I want to make sure everything is planned ahead. And that's where I come through to help design that plan. And how those plans will look like will vary a lot depending upon the families. But that's what I do in a nutshell.
Right. Are there common mistakes you see families make when it comes to estate planning?
Oh, gosh. Fortunately. So one big mistake that they might make is thinking all trusts are alike, that we all use the same template, that attorneys are just as good as paralegals when they have a simple plan, and that we are essentially document drafters. I don't draft documents. I really stand by my plans and taking a very holistic approach to make sure my clients are taken care of. Just yesterday, I was talking with a client. They prepared their plan in like 2018, 2019, and then they moved during the pandemic. And they're like, oh, Jeanette, but, we moved to, in the middle of nowhere, California. I'm like, oh, great. Congratulations. I'm going to miss you guys. And because I'm the attorney that I am, I looked up their address because I knew they owned their own home here and they bought a new home in middle of nowhere, California. And I looked up the deed. When they bought that new house, it was not titled in their trust. And so the trust was no longer protecting that house. And since they moved in 2020, I've been sending them emails and phone calls. I'm like, hey, you do realize you're not protected anymore, right? Like, I want to make sure you're taken care of. Like, I really want my plans for my clients to work when they are needed. And so when it comes to mistakes that clients make, they think that once they created a trust that they're taken care of. And they don't necessarily worry about the funding piece of it.
Right.
And by funding, that's a common term we use in estate planning. And funding essentially means the transfer of all of your assets into the trust. The trust can only protect what we put in it, right? So, for instance, that family who moved to middle of nowhere, California, that house that they purchased was no longer in the trust. They still had the trust, it's still valid, but it was no longer protecting that house because the house was not owned by the trust. A lot of times people will commonly overlook their checking account or an investment account, their stock, businesses, those things, because a lot of attorneys will just, transfer the real estate, their home into the trust and then don't talk about the rest of the stuff. And so for me, like I care. And so I offer 3-year check-ins for my clients. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Is it still valid? Are these still the people who you want in charge? Is there any other changes that happened in your life? Did you get married, divorced, someone passed away, purchased new home? And really trying to make sure that this plan will work when it's needed. Going back to other mistakes, so another common mistake, going back to the original point that they think they're all the same. They're not the same. Even trusts drafted by other attorneys are not created equal. Last year, I had a client come to me. She was a beneficiary of her aunt's trust. Aunt hired an attorney to create a trust. aunt did not have any kids, so decided to leave it to her niece, who was my client. The niece was quadriplegic, and she was receiving SSI benefits. And because of the way this trust was structured, she would lose her benefits. It did not have the right language in it. And this is drafted by an attorney. And I remember talking with the attorney, and why wouldn't you use this language? Like, I always include special needs language in all my cases. Even if I don't think it's going to be needed, I always include it. And they said, well, I don't practice in the special needs area, so I don't know anything about it. And I'm like, to me, that's not acceptable. Like, even if I am not practicing in that space, it is a huge concern. And you're aware that it's an issue. And I think that as an estate planning attorney, you need to be educated on all of these issues that might affect your clients and take that extra step to make sure that your clients are protected versus, well, they didn't tell me they wanted a special needs trust, so I didn't prepare one for them. I remember, I also started a Facebook group called Estate Planning Professionals. And I brought this up to the group. I'm like, I just can't believe that this attorney wouldn't, just use this language. And I know that language actually came from a very popular estate planning drafting software for attorneys. And so the software is fall short. I'm like, I just can't believe that they will rely on that. And her attorney even posted, I see nothing wrong with that language. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like this client is going to lose their benefits because this language, this short 1-paragraph language in this trust is not good enough. And they're like, well, I don't want to pay for, Wealth Counsel, which is like the most expensive drafting software and it makes the trust even very long. Like, I don't think my client needs a 50-page trust. I'm like, they may not, but there's always that 1% of your clients who do need it. And I'm not going to gamble on which 1% of my clients needs that language. That way I protect everyone. Because even though it might only affect 1% of my clients and is unlikely to come up, but if it does, that language is worth its weight in gold. And so a common mistake when clients are talking with attorneys is thinking that everyone's the same, and we're not. Some attorneys really care and will pay attention and listen and create a plan and will stand by their plans. And there's other attorneys who are just trying to make some money and are document drafters. They're in and out, and then they have no relationship with their clients whatsoever. And so my advice to anyone looking to prepare an estate plan and hire an attorney to help them is take a look at how that attorney works with their clients and the relationships that they're building with their clients. Do these attorneys actually care? Because that speaks a lot, I think, to the quality of work that they do. One of the hardest things I think about estate planning is you're not going to know whether or not it works really ever in your life. Your family will know when you're gone, if you're sick, but you yourself won't. And so I feel bad sometimes when these people, they're very proud that they did it myself. It's so simple. I did it. And maybe it worked. Because maybe they managed to bypass some of the other problems, but it doesn't always. And I've seen those cases, and they come to me afterwards, and I feel so bad because I can't help them. It's too late, and so we have to navigate through all these challenges that could have been avoided. I really hate those cases.
Hey, are there any situations where a will is actually better, is a better option than a trust?
Well, a will alone better than a trust? Well, no, with caveats. So there are situations where you might not need a trust. And so sometimes a trust may seem a little bit more cumbersome in terms of making sure it's properly funded and protected. But at the end of the day, I would do this comparison. Say your trust is like a minivan. And you can seat up to, let's say, 6 people in the minivan. And what are your goals, right? Do we need to necessarily transport up to 6 people in this car? Or are you looking to get from point A to point B? Now, the minivan will get you from point A to point B. So if a will is like a compact Hyundai, let's say, like a small little car that could
Right.
seat, really two people, let's say, maybe that's good enough for what you need, right?
Hmm.
And you don't necessarily need a larger car with that extra capacity. But the larger car will still get you from point A to point B, but it costs a lot more and has a lot more features that maybe you don't need. So is a will ever better than a trust? I'm going to say no, but the caveat is you might not need the extra features in a trust, right?
Got
That
it.
college kid who is 18 years old literally has $2 in their checking account and probably $100,000 with student loan debt and however much in credit card debt. Do they need a trust? Probably not.
Hmm.
Um, is it going to hurt them to create a trust? Probably not, other than the cost of setting it up.
Hmm.
Let me also say this. Oftentimes, when you're creating a trust, we're still going to give you a will.
Hmm.
So you're still like a trust is, I always think of it as a better package because you're still going to get, still going to get the will. When you have a
Hmm.
trust, your will is going to be very short. And it's going to
Hmm.
say anything I have in my individual name, I leave it to the trust. It is a pour over will.
Okay.
So that way you kind of get all the benefits of having a will-based plan with a trust. So the only downside,
Got
of
it.
course, is the cost difference, in maintaining a trust, which may not be necessary in all cases.
Got it. Um, how can a trust help prevent family conflicts after a loved one passes away?
So it can do that. So let's say there's many different conflicts that might come up. One
Yeah.
conflict that might come up is the kids don't get along.
Okay.
Let's say we have two kids, a brother and a sister, and they're always fighting. They never got along, always having that rivalry between them.
Yeah.
And so which child are you going to choose to be in charge? You already can imagine all the conflicts that might come up, right? So when you're
Yeah.
creating this trust, it comes down to, well, who's going to be that successor trustee?
Hmm.
A lot of times people say, well, I'm just going to choose the oldest child. And if they're not able to act, then I'll be the youngest child. And then all the conflicts start to happen because these kids don't get along. If I have
Hmm.
a client who comes to me in that situation, I actually tell them, don't choose either of the kids. Choose someone else to be in charge.
Mm.
And that way you're avoiding the conflict between the kids in terms of what should happen to the house. I want to sell it. I want to, rent it out, whatever it might be. Mom always loved you best. Well, let's just get rid of all that drama, right?
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
issue that might come up, especially between kids and beneficiaries, is who gets mom's wedding ring? Who gets grandma's pie plate that was used every single Thanksgiving and Christmas and has all of those memories attached? Those are things that you can't necessarily break in half and share equally. So in your plan, you may say, okay, I want this family heirloom to go to this person. And
Hmm.
it reduces the conflict because you're choosing who's receiving this special asset and they're not having to fight it out after you're gone.
Hmm.
Another conflict that might happen is how the money or the inheritance is managed after you're gone,
Hmm.
right? That's another issue
Right.
that comes up. And so the trust might protect the assets or the inheritance. They can get some asset protection.
Hmm.
Another conflict that might come up is, and this really has to do with how much you're talking with your kids and your successor trustee is how is mom going to be taken care of? If mom needs to go into a care home, mom doesn't want to go into a care home. I mean, who in their life said, okay,
Hmm.
when I get old, I wanted to go into a nursing home? No
Yeah.
one wants that. Everyone always says, I want to stay at home. I want to be cared for. I don't want to be put in some home and forgotten about.
Hmm.
Right. And these are things that you can address in your plan. Um,
Hmm.
it's not necessarily a legal document per se, but these are all part of the discussion that you can have with your family in terms of what you want, what your goals, taking a look at your resources, what's feasible, right?
Hmm.
So much of estate
Right.
planning, it's not just the documents themselves about how you're talking with your family afterwards or during or while you're doing your plan. It's so much more than just this is a trust, this is your will, power of attorney. It's more than that.
Yeah. I want to pivot slightly. I want to talk about the financial and legal benefits of trust. So, does a trust help families avoid probate? And also, why is that important?
So a trust will help avoid probate if the asset is properly put into the trust, right?
Okay.
So it's not alone to just have a trust. You actually need to make sure the asset is titled in the trust. You need to have some
Okay.
asset alignment, or make sure everything is properly funded. So as I said, the trust does avoid probate, but the assets need to be titled in there. Just having the document alone is not enough. So probate is a court process where the judge is going to oversee how all of your assets are handled.
Right.
Now, if you don't have a lot of stuff, it should be, you would think it'd be very simple, right? Let's
Mhm.
say I am single, I have one child, and I have one house that's
Mhm.
not even worth much. I mean, especially here, let's say it's only worth 400,000. You probably can't find a
Mhm.
house over here worth that much.
Yeah.
But let's just say it's worth 400,000. I am single with one child. You would think that I have no debt even, right? Let's just try to keep this as stripped down and simple as possible. And I did
Yeah.
not plan thinking, oh, everything's just going to go to my child when I'm gone. So right
Yeah.
now in Santa Clara County, a probate proceeding might take up to 18 months uncontested. This is when no one is fighting. No one is contesting a will. No one's arguing. It might take that long to get through the process. And so it might
Mhm.
take that long before they can sell the house. And
Yeah.
because the probate process, you have to think about how it was first developed. It was almost a spin-off bankruptcy, but it was bankruptcy for people who passed away. So the probate process was designed to make sure creditors were paid. It was
Okay.
not designed to help families. So it's not family friendly at all. So in probate, if you want to start a probate, anyone can file the petition. A creditor can file a probate petition to liquidate all the assets to ensure that creditor gets paid. So the very
Mhm.
first thing you do when probate is you file a petition. And the judge
Mhm.
requires that you give notice to all family members within 2 degrees to make sure
Okay.
that the person who filed the petition, who wants to be a charge, who wants to be that executor, is the right person. Does anyone contest? Well, if I'm single and I have one child and my child is filing that probate, no one's going to contest. But you still
Okay.
need to file a petition and go through the notice period. Make sure no one objects, right? Okay, great. We didn't
Right.
object. Okay, now we need to do an inventory to see everything that I owned when I passed away. Does everyone agree that this is everything that Jeanette owned? No objections? Okay, that's next step. All right, we want to sell the house. Does anyone object to that? Oh no, we also may get permission to list it on the market, to pay the real estate agent, for the whole process. And if it was a
Mhm.
home, it may even need to be publicized in the newspaper before they're allowed to sell. So you can see they keep adding all these notice requirements just to make sure that no one's opposing at any step.
Mhm.
Because I might not oppose someone being in charge. Oh yeah, they can handle the court hearings, file the paperwork. I don't want to do that. Oh, but
Mhm.
they said that the house was included. Oh no, the house was not included in her. She didn't own that house. She owned this. Or she only owned 1%. And they're saying she owned 10%. I object to that portion of it.
Mhm.
Oh no, I don't think they should sell the house. I actually wanted to keep it because I think it's a good investment. I object. So that's why every single step of the process, the judge is double checking. Are there objections?
Mhm.
And that's why it takes so long. And the
Got it.
paperwork is just ridiculous. Even attorneys, who are not experienced in this area and trying to file a probate proceeding will mess up on the paperwork. So just
Wow.
imagine a layperson who has no experience trying to do this themselves. It's cumbersome. It is not an easy process, which is why everyone always says you want to avoid probate because it's super stressful. It's very
Yeah.
time consuming. And when it comes to costs, the cost of a probate might be 3% of the gross value of your estate. Maybe more if it's really contested. So if you own a house, how much are you looking at spending in probate fees? And that's a lot of money, especially for a house here in Santa Clara County,
Yep. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. Um, are there any tax benefits to having a trust in place?
Not initially. A lot of the taxes that come about, well, a lot of the tax issues that we commonly think that a trust will also address if you don't have a plan. Now, you probably up there's first we have to clarify what type of taxes we're talking about. In general, I deal with 3 types of taxes. There is the estate tax, which is actually a combined lifetime and death tax. We have property taxes, and we also have income tax, which is resulting from capital gains. So a trust might help with estate taxes, assuming you own enough assets to have to be worried about that. A trust can offer some structures to reduce or delay the payment of those type of taxes. So it can be beneficial in that end. But the other taxes in terms of property taxes and capital gains, it really depends on the situation and whether or not it offers an additional benefit or not. For most middle-class families, which is a single-family residence, probably not. But there can be some situations in a more complex situation where it can offer some benefits.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense.
I know. Your pretty answer is always it depends.
Yeah, I get it. Every situation is totally different. For families who might be thinking about selling a senior's home, how can having a trust in place make that process smoother?
So this actually had came up, was it last year or the year before? So a senior was trying to sell this house, put it on the market. And this is right when the market started to dip. So I think it was 2 years ago. And during escrow, he passed away. So think about what happens when someone passes away during the middle of escrow. What's going to happen to the sale of the house? Do we have to stop everything and now go through probate and go through that whole process I just talked about? The house was in a trust. So the successor trustee stepped in right away. They closed escrow on time.
Wow.
Now, and when the market turns, like right when this did, just imagine what this meant for that family to know that the house was selling at the time they did with no delays.
Yeah.
And that was because the home was in the trust.
What a relief. They lucked out. That worked out perfectly.
They did in that case, yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
can imagine.
the other issue is like, when someone's incapacitated, because this often happens.
Yeah.
Mom and dad own the house, and their care needs increase, where now, unfortunately, we do need to send them to assisted living, but they can't pay for assisted living until they sell the house, right?
Yeah.
They no longer can sign the paperwork. They have advanced dementia, don't understand what's going on. If there is no plan in place, what's the consequence? They're still alive. So we're not dealing with probate. We're dealing with a conservatorship.
Yeah.
Which is essentially a probate, but you're still alive. So in a conservatorship, you go to the probate court to say, hey, mom has dementia. She can't take care of herself. She did not create a power of attorney or a trust or any type of estate plan. And we want to sell her house. So I need permission to sell her house that's in her name.
Yeah.
And so there's all these protections that the judge wants to make sure. They want to make sure the daughter stepping in is responsible, doesn't have a criminal history, that she's not going to steal mom's money. So the court's going to oversee the entire process. And much like the probate petition, the conservator petitions is I want to say it's like 12 forms that you have to fill out. Now, these are free forms you can find online, but they're dense forms. You need to file like all 12 of them in the package. So it's not the easiest thing to do. And if you own a house, you probably need to post a bond. You need to give notice to all the relatives. The hearing date is probably 3 to 4 months out. Unless you can file for an emergency, just say, we need to sell this house right now or there's consequences. So before you can even sell the house, if someone has dementia, you're looking at, maybe a 6-month delay.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you have to continue paying out of pocket before you can get that money out of the house to pay for care. So this is where, having an estate plan really becomes beneficial is if you get sick or incapacitated or you pass away. And the challenging thing about these things is we don't know when that's going to happen.
Right.
So people often say, oh, I'm healthy, I'm young, I don't need to worry about this, I'll do this later. We don't know when later is and when we actually need it. And so I wish I had that crystal ball. to know when we need to plan so that we can time our lives, right? Life would be a lot easier if we knew what our health would be like, when we're going to pass away, how much money I need until all that, but we don't know. And
Yeah.
so the hardest thing about estate planning is you need to prepare your estate plan way in advance of when you need it.
Yeah.
So that it's ready for when you do need it. Because once you do need it and you don't have it in place, it's too late to get one. That's
Okay.
the hardest thing about what I do.
Yeah. You already started talking about, when seniors need to transition to get some, senior care or whatnot. I want to talk a little bit even more about that. So, what are the financial and legal benefits of setting up a trust before a senior needs care, whether it's in-home caregiving or moving into an assisted living community?
So, I mean, a lot of it just has to do with kind of what I talked about in terms of avoiding the court cost of a
Okay.
conservatorship, right? That's really
Yeah.
at a basic level, that's what a estate plan would do.
Yeah.
On a deeper level, if you're really preparing your estate plan, a key component of it is talking with your family about these issues
Yeah.
so that you know what the plan is. Like my mom, her father had Alzheimer's, and so we've been
Okay.
joking or, discussing this for a long time in my family.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at in terms of her Social Security and the mortgage in the house and who's going to cover this, and if she needs more care, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Do we have enough resources to either do it ourselves or hire additional care? Or, what
Yep.
what is the plan? My mom is from Taiwan, and so for my grandfather, who's also from Taiwan, the plan at the time when he had Alzheimer's was to ship him back to Taiwan. They have universal health care.
Yeah.
Not every family can do that.
Right.
So much of this type of planning is talking with your families.
Yeah.
A lot of families actually may have someone who's not working, and so they take on the brunt of the caregiving to try to
Hmm.
save on those costs.
Right.
Is that your plan? It's having those discussions with your family, because every family will come up with something different that will work for them.
Yep. Yep. What advice would you give to adult children handling their parents' estate planning for the very first time?
So the big question here is, when are they stepping in?
Mm.
I often will have adult children calling me to try to help their
Okay.
parents get their estate plan done, created. And my
Right.
first question to them is, well, how is your parents' health right now?
Hmm.
Do they still remember things? Do they have dementia? Do they have mobility issues? What's going on? Because what I'm trying to determine as the attorney is, who is my client? If the
Yeah.
parents have capacity, my client is going to be the parent, even though the adult children may be highly involved.
Hmm.
And this is where it's challenging as the attorney, because you owe a lot of duties to your client. You owe a duty to make sure you're loyal. You keep everything confidential.
Right.
You're not supposed to share things unless you have permission. You also have to protect your clients and make sure there's no undue influence going on.
Uh-huh.
So
Hmm.
sometimes when an adult child is involved in trying to create the estate plan, sometimes I want them out of the room, and they get really offended. I actually had
Hmm.
one case where I was working with a senior. I was working with just her. And during the signing meeting, she asked if it was okay if she called her daughter, who lived out of state, to listen in. And I said, okay,
Hmm.
you can listen. We don't do much during the signing meeting. She wasn't physically present. We already had determined all the terms of it, but she wanted to
Yeah.
have an introduction. So I said she could listen in. And she started asking questions about the plan. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I can't share this, because attorney-client
Yeah.
privilege. And she got
Yeah.
really upset with me. Really upset. She's
Oh,
like, what are you doing? This is my mom. That's my inheritance.
wow.
And in this particular case, I wasn't as concerned about undue influence. But that attitude, and I get it. You're concerned about your mom. You don't know this person who's doing this, and they're all of a sudden telling you they can't share with you what they're doing. and you're not
Oh,
there
yeah.
to see what's going on. There's a lot of issues regarding elder abuse and being taken advantage of. It's hard. I get it. But on the other
Yep.
hand, as the attorney, I have to be aware of what I can share and what I can't share.
Right.
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 So that's always the challenging line when I have adult children getting involved in the process.
Yeah.
Sometimes when it comes down to adult children getting involved, it's because the parent no longer does have capacity, right? And the adult children are the caregivers. They're the ones stepping in. And so then the
Mhm.
question is there a plan already in place? There is a plan in place, and we have to follow that plan. And then it's a matter of
Okay.
helping the children take care of their parents according to that plan. Well, the very first conservatorship case I had filed when I first started like almost 10 years ago now, it
Yeah.
was for a parent who did have a plan. She did have a trust, but they didn't have a power of attorney.
Oh,
And the house was in the trust, but the trust didn't have the right language in it. So they wanted to take out a reverse mortgage to help pay for in-home care for mom.
yeah.
And the trust did not allow that. So I had to go into court to establish a conservatorship and to
Mhm.
modify the trust to allow them to borrow against the house that was in the trust.
Wow. There's a lot, a
Just
lot
because
of,
the
lot
right
of,
language was not.
yeah. That's a complicated situation to handle. Wow. There's a lot of layers of complexity.
There is,
Um,
right? Which is really hard when you're trying to get general advice like this because it's so much that goes on. So that's why it's almost like a little flow chart. If when are
yeah.
adult children involved? Why are they involved? What are they hoping to do? Right? If the
Yeah.
parent is passed on and they're now the successor trustee and they're trying to gather
Yeah.
assets, then it's helping them in that role, right? To distribute
Right.
all the assets according to the trust or the will, right? So
Right.
the first question when adult children are always involved is why? What are they trying to do? Sometimes they're involved because they want to help, but they're not, they're just a
Mhm.
beneficiary. Or maybe they have questions about their parents' plan. Like I have sometimes adult children calling, if my mom's trust says this, does that mean I can do this? I'm like, are you the trustee? No, I'm just the, I'm receiving a share. But my mom is still alive. I'm like, all right. Generally, I don't represent beneficiaries. I don't handle any sort of
Yeah.
litigation. But again, that's
Yeah.
another path, right? Another issue that comes up with adult children.
Yep. Makes sense. Um, hey, I'm gonna switch like topics completely now. I now want to talk about your senior care business support, your South Bay group.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, you founded Senior Care Business Support South Bay. What inspired you to start that group for senior living professionals?
Yeah. So I've always been a huge fan of building community. I do a
Yeah.
lot of networking professionally with other business owners in multiple groups. And I even started a few Facebook groups. I started one
Yeah.
for estate planning professionals so that other people working within this space can connect on a professional basis and get advice. That group is now over 4,000 people with estate planning
Oh,
attorneys
wow.
nationwide. And that's how I kind of know, well, I know that Florida does this because like the questions pop up in the Facebook group. I'm like, I don't really know Florida law because I don't practice in Florida, but I see this discussion going on and I know they do something weird over there with ladybird deeds and whatever else they do at their homestead. And I don't know. But
Yeah.
I love that source of learning and community. And so
Yeah.
when I started networking more in person here, I really didn't feel there was a right group for those of us working with seniors. There's a
Yeah.
few other groups here that work with professionals who work with seniors, like there's the Senior Roundtable,
Right.
Perfectory Advisory Councils, things like that. But they all had different goals. And
Right.
so when I was looking at starting my own group, my goals were this. I wanted a group that kind of cross-pollinate and introduce people from my various groups. So I
Mhm.
wanted to introduce, this realtor over here to this videographer who does memorial videos, to this person who does funeral planning, to this person who, get dementia support or in-home care, right? I wanted to introduce all of these people together because they may not be in the same group where I originally met
Yep.
them from. So I wanted a place where everyone can meet. Now, there's other
Yep.
groups that do that, but they're more mixer type of meetings where everyone just kind of gets together and they hand out business cards, and it's up to you to establish those one-on-one connections and to build the relationship. I want to
Yeah.
do a smaller, more intimate group that's really focused on getting to know each other and collaborate with one another. So that's really the goal of the group. So every single month when we meet, and all the meetings are in person because it's very important to me that I network with people within my area. Some of the
Yep.
groups, they're online only. You'll see this person who offers maybe dementia caregiver support groups. And they're in,
Yep.
I don't know, Washington State. Well, that doesn't really help me with my
Yep.
clients living here in Santa Clara County. So I really wanted to meet in person. I didn't necessarily want a speaker every single month because I feel well, it can be educational. I would rather spend the time having a
Yep.
good discussion and getting to know everyone. Um, I wanted a place where the focus was more on collaboration versus exchanging business cards. So every single month, we don't have like a set agenda. I will
Okay.
ask, everyone will go around, introduce themselves, how they help seniors. And then we'll have a few kind of
Yep.
discussion questions. Right now, we're trying to collaborate on a few speaking engagements, maybe a senior fair. So that's exciting to give that benefit out to the community. There's also a Facebook
Yeah.
group that goes along with it so that we can share our resources and connect with one another, where we can connect in between the monthly meetings. So it's all about building that connection and that community and support for one another.
Yeah. I love what you're doing there, by the way. Yeah. I
Thank
love what
you.
you're doing there. And I mean, you're a natural connector. And even me putting out this podcast, for example, I'm a natural connector myself, but I'm doing it digitally and I know how to podcast and trying to bring everybody together. So I can even also make intros myself and connect people when I see, a benefit. So I love what you're doing. And how can someone in the senior care industry join or get involved with your business support group?
Yeah. So one method might be to join the Facebook group. It is Senior Care being one word, business support South Bay is the name of the Facebook group. Generally speaking, if you're
Yep.
within the Santa Clara South Bay area, I'm going to approve the application as long as it seems like you actually work with seniors. Now, just to clarify, the group is not
Yeah.
for seniors or caregivers looking for support and dealing with their seniors, or people
Yeah.
looking for how to get connected to these professionals. It's really for professionals to connect with one another.
Right.
So joining the
Yep.
Facebook group is one, and I post, in the group, when our next meetings are. We generally meet on the third Wednesday of the month. We're currently meeting at another small business called A Healing Place in up at Blossom Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Another way is you can always connect with me, and I'm always happy to introduce you to various resources and things I see that are going on. So always happy to connect and support people.
Love it. Okay, I love it. Hey, I completely switching topics. What's one myth about estate planning that drives you crazy?
Estate planning is just about the documents.
Gotcha.
And you hear this a lot because people don't know what estate planning is. And so it's very hard to shop for estate planning or
Yeah.
know what you need. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes people, because they don't know much about it. So when you're shopping or trying to get something, what's the very first thing that comes to mind? How much does this cost? Right?
Most.
And
Yeah.
the thing is, some attorneys are able to, oh yeah, a trust will cost, $2,500. I'm like, what type of trust? How are you able to give a price when you don't even know what's involved or what you're doing?
Right.
Because if you're able to give a price right off the bat like that, that means you're selling a product. That means you're selling documents, right? I don't do that. And I think a lot
Right.
of lit attorneys don't do that as well, where we're actually providing advice. I want to be that trusted counselor to help make the right decisions in the trust, because it's not about a language per se. It's about choosing the right people, about making sure what we put into the trust is just important, making sure that all the pieces work. I take a very holistic look at it. So one myth
Yeah.
that really gets me is it's just about the documents. And because when you think about it, it's just documents. Then it's about when do I need it? I only need it when this happens, right?
Yeah.
I only need these documents when I get old, when I get sick, and I'm young and healthy, so I don't need it, because we're thinking about it as documents versus legal advice. Because when do you actually need legal advice on estate planning? It's going to
Right.
be when I have my first child, when I get married, when I divorce,
Mhm.
when I buy my first home, when I retire, when I have grandchildren out. Someone in my family is encountering a difficulty, a health illness. Those are all triggers where people naturally start thinking about estate planning. But again, it's not documents. It's about your family and making sure they're taken care of, right? It's
Yeah.
everything that surrounds that. It's so much more than documents.
Okay. Makes sense. Uh, if you could give adult child one piece of advice about planning for their parents, what would it be?
Yeah. Try to have a good discussion with your parents. Now, keep in mind when you have this discussion, you have to understand your place and the
Yeah.
dynamics involved in that discussion, because it can open up a landmine.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. If your parents have not created an estate plan, ultimately, who does it fall on to do all of this work, to go through the probate process, to deal with the mess? It will be on the adult child.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to realize, especially if you have siblings, are you that child who actually will be doing all the work, or are you concerned because
Yeah.
maybe someone else will be in charge and you don't trust them as much? There's a lot that can go on, right? And so when you're
Right.
having that discussion with your parents, you first have to, I think, understand your motivation for having that discussion.
Yeah.
Um, because it really should be coming from a place of caring to make sure your parents are taken care of, right? Not what's going to happen to my stuff when you're gone,
Yeah.
right? And I think
Right.
if you come from that place, and if you come from a place of vulnerability because you care and you're worried about your parents and you want to make sure they're taken care of, and you share that vulnerability, the
Yeah.
discussion goes a lot better. But yeah, having that open discussion about your parents' plan is essential, but
Got it.
sometimes people are very reluctant to talk about it. And so
Yeah.
I actually have a whole presentation on how to have this discussion with your parents. It's an hour-long presentation, so it's hard to squeeze in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave you with this. It is important to have the discussion, but depending upon the dynamics, you may not necessarily be the right person to have that discussion with your parents. It may be someone else.
Yeah. That's really solid advice. I love that. Um, what's one thing most people don't know about you?
Oh gosh. One thing they don't know about me. So one thing people don't know about me, I will say that I'm a voracious reader. I read a
Okay.
lot. So well, especially before I got the dog, I was almost
Yeah.
reading a book a day. You learn a lot, and there's a lot of fiction.
Yeah.
But I think it just couples with, I'm always trying to improve, I'm always trying to learn, and so even reading fiction, like junky romances, you still learn a bit, and I feel like that creates a lot of empathy in
Yeah.
trying to learn how the other side might view things,
Mhm.
and I think that makes me a better planner.
Yeah. And I think so too. Yeah. And it's amazing. My last question, is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
I think the big question that a lot of people have comes about, um, one thing that I think people need to know about estate planning is, again, having those discussions about how the plan actually works. Um,
Mhm.
it's not just the documents, they're a little bit beyond, it's what else can you do to make sure it's successful? And what do we mean by an estate planning being successful? So there's the financial piece, there's the legal piece, but I think the one thing that's commonly overlooked is the emotional piece of it.
Mhm.
Um, digital photos, legacy
Mhm.
videos, sharing your
Mhm.
pictures and those stories. Um,
Mhm.
I guess this will also go, I'll share another thing that a lot of people don't know about me, because I guess it'll tie in, is I can actually trace my ancestry back to the American Revolution. I did not
Wow.
know this. It was not part of our family history. I just couldn't sleep one summer and I decided to look up our genealogy. So I went on ancestry.com and was able to trace it back. But it wasn't part of our family history. Why wasn't this part of our family history? It somehow got lost in the generations. So moving forward in terms of family, it's how can we stop those stories from being lost?
Yeah.
Right. And this is where you really start wrapping in like legacy videos. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the big emotional thing about what I want to, my last message. And, it doesn't have to be heavy. Your legacy video could be something as simple as sharing a memory that you have. If you have children, sharing a memory about these kids when they're little. Because when you're gone, your kids are going to have to look back at the video. They're going to see how you told the story, hear your voice, your cadence, how you look, your body, language when you're telling the story. And that means a lot to a lot of people. So it's the emotional part of the estate planning that I think a lot of people overlook that are just as important.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. This has been such a valuable conversation. Thank you, Jeanette, for breaking down why estate planning is so important, especially for seniors and their families, and for sharing how the Senior Care Business Support South Bay Group is making a difference for senior care professionals. Before we wrap up, how can families or professionals connect with you and learn about your services? Best contact information?
Yeah. So my website is very easy to remember. It is sanjoselivingtrust.com. And so that families can just go to my website, learn more about me there. You can also give me a call at my office. My phone number is 650-600-1735. Always happy to connect with people. You can also generally find me on LinkedIn and, as well for any other professionals. I'm very searchable. Always happy to connect with other people in the senior space.
Love it. And for those of you watching, if your loved one is considering senior living and you need to figure out what to do with their home, let's talk. Schedule a free consultation with me on my Calendly link. If you're watching the YouTube version of this episode, it's in the description box of this video, or learn about my services at www.simplifyseniortransitions.com. If you have a quick question, DM me on Instagram at soldbydale. And if you found this interview helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this information. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Thank you, Jeanette, again, for being on this show with me. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast.